environment more important than Iraq? Is it more important than the economy? Or really are all these issues interrelated?
Two thoughts. The New York Times, in preparing for today, a recent piece in the New York Times agreed with you 100% that the candidates are saying the right things on environmental issues from an environmentalist perspective. But other issues, bread and butter issues, the war, are taking priority. The one other point I'd raise, if I were to play devil's advocate, is in the opening script, none of the people were asked, would you be willing to pay an extra $1 in gas taxes to achieve your goals? It was sort of an open-ended question of, do you want less litter and less pollution? And even Dick Cheney would say yes to that. But if we said to our vice president, if we raised your taxes $2 a gallon, how would he vote then? And how would the participants at that borders have responded?
Excellent point. How are we doing nationally when it comes to the environment?
Air quality progress, certainly. I mean, local smog, local particulates improving. And my book celebrates this fact. Water quality progress. The Charles River, you can now swim if you're a Harvard or MIT student without dissolving. But on global criteria, greenhouse gas emissions, we stink. John Edwards makes the point that we're 4% of the world's population, but create 25% of the emissions, and not setting a great example for China or India right now. And so we can certainly do better, and I'm confident that whoever is our next president, that there will be a federal agenda, but I would bet that it will be building on what we've learned in California through the innovative policies being considered now.
You know, we're certainly going to get much more specific about what we're doing here in California and Los Angeles. But before we leave the issue of the environment, the nation, and President Bush, let's take a look at a clip. And this is President Bush speaking during the 2006 State of the Union. And he says that America is addicted to oil, sets target of reducing U.S. oil imports from the Middle East by 75% by 2025. Let's take a look at that clip and we'll comment on that afterwards. So we'll go to that clip now.
Energy. And here we have a serious problem. America is addicted to oil, which is often imported from unstable parts of the world. The best way to break this addiction is through technology. Since 2001, we have spent nearly $10 billion to develop cleaner, cheaper, and more reliable alternative energy sources. And we are on the threshold of incredible advances. So tonight I announce the Advanced Energy Initiative, a 22% increase in clean energy research at the Department of Energy to push for breakthroughs in two vital areas. To change how we power our homes and offices, we will invest more in zero-emission coal-fired plants, revolutionary solar and wind technologies, and clean, safe nuclear energy. We must also change how we power our automobiles. We will increase our research in better batteries for hybrid and electric cars and in pollution-free cars that run on hydrogen. We will also fund additional research in cutting-edge methods of producing ethanol, not just from corn, but from wood chips and stalks or switchgrass. Our goal is to make this new kind of ethanol practical and competitive within 6 years. Breakthroughs on this and other new technologies will help us reach another great goal, to replace more than 75% of our oil imports from the Middle East by 2025. By applying the talent and technology of America, this country can dramatically improve our environment, move beyond a petroleum-based economy, and make our dependence on Middle Eastern oil a thing of the past.
Certainly, now when we look back certainly has many of us evaluating how well the president has done in improving the environment, at really seeking out and promoting alternative fuel sources. How well has he done when we look back at that now? That's almost 2 years later?
A challenge. The questions continue to be tough. So the optimist in me, and I like to be optimistic, I see the rise of the Toyota Prius and other hybrids. I see environmentalists voting with their pocketbook and purchasing these vehicles and driving all over Los Angeles. And this encourages for-profit vehicle makers to make more of these and to make greener vehicles. But then we get into a question of, does the president get credit for this? And I will leave that to smarter men and women than me. But I'll wonder if we had a president with the intestinal fortitude to have a higher gas tax, could we have a fleet that looks more like a European, more fuel-efficient fleet? And would we have made much greater progress in achieving Kyoto-like goals for reducing greenhouse gases? So the technological frontier is moving forward, but I'm sympathetic to some of Al Gore's arguments that we can do better and that the government needs to be out there. But again, that dirty word of taxes, economists like it in this case because of its incentive effects, but we seem to be the minority here.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of Al Gore, what were your thoughts when he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize? Well, he's sharing it with the UN group, but
I was excited. My students at UCLA, my environmental students, were excited. The reason I'm not related to Al Gore and don't have any chance to get the $500,000 he must have earned. But what excited me is I'm a believer that that salient events, whether it's a Chernobyl or a 3 Mile Island or Rachel Carson's Silent Spring or an Al Gore winning a Nobel Prize, that these can be catalytic events to focus the spotlight on environmental issues and make progress. And so I've been in my own research, and I won't put you to sleep with the details about it, but I've been very interested in when environmental shocks occur, sometimes bad ones like Chernobyl, but sometimes good ones like a Gore Nobel Prize. That focus has distracted people's attention to environmental issues and makes it more possible to get a political coalition to push for greener policy.
So maybe right now is a good time for the candidates to start promoting environmental issues. I guess it has, or at least I would think, this is kind of the Pollyanna, side of me, that the politicians really are promoting what they feel passionate about. I'd like to believe that's the truth.
I would like to live in your world, and I think we do, but perhaps out of pursuit of narrow self-interest, the hope of being elected and re-elected, it would be wonderful if the politicians, the candidates in '08, believed that the environment is an important enough issue that they should put that up there with national security and basic other services. But the candidates right now are saying the right things, but it'll be interesting if they get more specific as the California primary becomes closer.
Mm-hmm. And we are moving closer to it. Let me remind you that we are broadcasting live from Cal State University Dominguez Hills. This is the Election 2008 show. We will be tackling issues dealing with the election, with politics all semester, and we would love to hear what you have to say. Today we're focusing on the environment as a political issue for both the candidates and for us here in California. If you have thoughts or questions for our guest, Dr. Kahn, please call us. Our phone number is 800-339-1193, or you may email us at dominguezonline.csudh.edu. While we're talking about the national issue, or the environmental issue nationally, let's take a look at our next clip, which I think really addresses the issue of how people living outside of our country view our environmental stands, or our issues, or our tax, if you will, on the environment. This is a BBC report by Peter Marshall. He's reporting from Washington on the eve of the 2007 State of the Union address. And he talks with folks from the Center for American Progress about the president's energy proposals and discusses the challenges presented by climate change. So let's take a look at that clip now.
Congress for the first time in his penultimate State of the Union address, and it had been thought he may produce some bold initiative on climate change to try and claw back lost ground. But now it seems that's not going to happen. Welcome to America, weird weather capital of the world. It's snowing where they expect sun, like here on the desert floor of Arizona, or the iced orange groves of California, where they've declared a state of emergency. And while much of the country has frozen, there have been heat waves where they'd expect snow, like New York State, all of which brings home the issue of climate change as never before.
The American people are increasingly concerned about global warming. They want to see action taken. Because of Hurricane Katrina, because of other extreme weather events, the weather is just strange, and it gives them a real visceral sense that something is wrong, that something is changing, and they're increasingly feel that they have an impact on it, and they want to know what they can do to help.
But if they're looking to the White House for leadership, they do so in vain. The president, who last year pledged to break America's addiction to oil, has yet to come up with a policy. Even the energy industry is in despair after he cancelled a meeting with chief executives from the likes of DuPont to General Electric, who've been demanding caps on greenhouse gases. They say voluntary measures aren't enough.
The time is now, and time is of the essence. The sooner we act, the more options we have for solutions. The less costly they will be, and the fewer uncertainties we will face with the climate.
Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth has been winning awards and focusing minds, but the White House has appeared in disarray on climate change. Mandatory carbon caps were in a draft of the president's speech, we're told, but were then removed. So what's left?
I think we'll see a big push for more renewable fuels, possibly a push for increased efficiency of vehicles, maybe a nod to climate change, but it's not going to go far enough.
So President Bush is behind American opinion again.
He is increasingly isolated. The Democrats now control Capitol Hill. Both leaders in the House and the Senate have said it's an important issue for them and they want to move it forward. Even within his own party, Governor Schwarzenegger out in California, former Governor Pataki have all been leaders on this issue and pushing this issue forward.
If the political weather's bad for Bush on climate change.
Certainly brings up some interesting viewpoints from a different perspective. You know, us here, we somewhat isolate ourselves as United States residents, not only physically, but mentally, and a lot of our issues that are global in nature.
I have a co-author in Beijing, and I ask her what's going on in Beijing and wonder what, with the Olympics coming to Beijing, there's a debate there about how green a city Beijing could be through investments. What fascinates me is when we think of China or India 30 years from now, as these economies grow, what do they have an American dream of wanting their own sprawled house and their own car? And if they did, in aggregate, what does that add up to in terms of the world's ecological footprint? Optimistic economists would counter that technology transfer. We could give them some of our better ideas of cleaner power plants, of greener technologies, that this would be a way for these developing countries to have the win-win of developing, but without the environmental impacts that we've imposed on our past path.
Oh, that's interesting. You know, I wanted to talk a little bit about this article that's in the October 2007 issue of Reader's Digest. We can get a shot of that. We have the cover here. But this is an article that you wrote that's, I just glanced at it, so I haven't read it in depth, but it really goes into the issue of how green are we as a country, as a state, as a city. Let's start with country. How green are we as a country?
The United States, out of 141 countries, we were roughly 23rd, if I'm remembering my facts correctly. And the greenest nations on Earth, this Finland, this Iceland, this Norway, what they did better than us was on these greenhouse gas criteria. And so with my co-author, Fran Losty, we had a very good experience trying to collect objective data, sort of like a report card. And in my world, I'd love to be able to do this every couple of years to get a moving average. Maybe this is the nerd in me, but are the browner countries doing better over time? And are the greener countries getting complacent? You'd have to do this repeatedly. Now, some bad news for a fellow member of Los Angeles. Relative to other cities in the US, Los Angeles didn't score so well. And again, it was this not using public transit and this production of greenhouse gases per capita. So that's always, with the United States, both at the city and national level, we're scoring low because of our big footprint of greenhouse gases per capita.
Mm-hmm. How big of an economy is it now and going to be in the future for green products and processes?
That's a great question. At UCLA's Institute of the Environment, we're actually trying to get a center up and going on basically free market environmentalism. I would love it if the Toyota Prius or these recent LEED buildings, that this is the tip of the iceberg of the profitability from the win-win of green products that make money. The challenge here is with new products, people will say the right things, like what we heard at Borders, but will they vote their pocketbook if a roll of toilet paper that doesn't use trees or recycles the paper is $1 more? And so will people put their money where their mouth is if they're willing to do so, perhaps because they're environmentalists or for whatever motivation? Then I'm very optimistic about green products.
You know, and I wondered, you talked about the Prius and the other hybrid cars. I can't help but wonder if people were buying up those cars because they wanted to be greener, or they simply wanted to get in the carpool lane, which we ran out of those decals in the state of California, I think much earlier than our leaders of the state thought we were going to.
So I have one thing to say there. When this came out on the front page of the Los Angeles Times, I put in a Freedom of Information Act request and got all 85,000 stickers. And here's what I learned. In the zip code where University of California, Berkeley is, a well-known environmentalist community, the count of those stickers relative to the zip code in Westwood, where UCLA is 6-1. And so this encouraged me that the people pursuing these stickers were not highway-loving. These were the Berkeley Birkenstock crew. And it does interest me, though, of the unintended consequences with green products. But at least in this case, I thought that the Greens were grabbing these.
That's nice to hear. I wasn't so sure that was the case, but at least the research is pointing us that direction. So that's good to know.
But a follow-up point, there's going to be a big push in California for greener products. And one point that economists have made, and I'll test everyone's knowledge of economics, if we make it cheap to drive a mile because a car gets so much fuel economy, some cynical economists would say that people will drive more. And so we call this the rebound effect. And so it'll be interesting if green products help to green capitalism. And so if I'm ever invited back to this show, I'll report next time.
Excellent. Since we're talking about the state of California, let's go to our next clip, which is our governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, talking to the Council on Foreign Relations. This was earlier this year, and he's talking about carbon emissions and California surpassing U.S. standards. So let's go ahead and take a look at that clip.
But someone showed me the other day a cartoon, very funny one, that shows a salesman in a showroom talking to this couple. And he's pointing at the car and he says, it runs on conventional gasoline-powered engine. And then when it senses a little guilt, it switches over to battery power. And it's very funny, but the strange thing about it is there's a lot of truth to that, because for too long the environmental movement has been powered by guilt. But I believe that it is about to switch over. It's about to switch, because it's going to be powered not by guilt, but by something much more positive, by something much more dynamic, by something much more capable of bringing about real big change. You know the kind of guilt that I'm talking about, the smokestacks, belching pollution that are powering our big screen TVs or powering our jacuzzis, or in my case, flying me around with private jets. But it is too bad that we can all live as simple lives as monks in Tibet. But you know something, it's not going to happen. So ladies and gentlemen, I don't think that any movement has ever made it or has ever made much progress based on guilt. Because guilt is passive, guilt is inhibiting, and guilt is defensive. You remember the commercial a number of years ago of the Native American that has seen what we have done to the environment, and then all of a sudden a tear runs down his cheek. Or you know something, that approach did not work. It was disastrous. The successful movements are all built on passion, not on guilt. They're built on passion, they're built on confidence, and they're built on critical mass. And often they're built on an element of alarm that galvanizes action. The environmental movement is, to use a popular term, at a tipping point right now. I believe that the tipping point will occur when the environmental movement is no longer seen as a nag, or a scold, but it is seen as a positive force in people's lives. I don't know when the tipping point occurs, but I know where, and that is in California. We are doing everything that we can in order to tip the balance on environment. First, let me start with government policy. Now, I don't want to go through all of the things, all of the policies and initiatives that we have accomplished, because you've heard that already very eloquently from Governor Weld. But there's two things that got us the most attention of anything. One, we passed a law to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by the year 2020, meaning that we're going to roll back our greenhouse gas emissions to the 1990 level. And then we're going to go and cut 80% below the 1990 level by the year 2050. And two, I ordered a 10% cut on the carbon content of transportation fuel. Now, do I believe that what California does and the standards that we set will really solve global warming? No, of course not. What we're doing is applying leverage that at some point the whole environmental thing would tip. It's like a seesaw. You walk up to it and then eventually it would tip down to the other side. California is so big, California is so powerful that what we do has consequences. Now, even though when you look at the globe, California is just a little spot, but the kind of power of influence that we have on the rest of the world makes us look like a huge continent. And what we are saying is, we are sending the world a simple message, that what we are saying is that we are going to change the dynamic on greenhouse gas and on carbon emissions. We are taking actions ourselves. We are not waiting for the federal government. We are not waiting for Washington. As a matter of fact, we are creating our own partnerships. Partnerships, for instance, with Great Britain, with provinces in Canada, and with states in the West and in the Northeast. And every year we are gaining and we're creating more partners, and our partnership is getting bigger and bigger. What we are doing is increasing the momentum for change. Now, there's a billboard that is out in Michigan that accuses me of costing the car industry $85 billion because of our carbon emission standards that we have set in California. The billboard says, Arnold to Michigan, drop dead. But that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, Arnold to Michigan, get off your butt. Join us. In fact, California may be doing more to save the U.S. automakers than anyone else, because what we are doing is pushing Detroit to make the changes so they can sell their cars in the Golden State. And we all know that if they don't make the changes, someone else will. The Japanese will, the Chinese will, the South Koreans will, the Germans will, and the list goes on and on. I believe in American technology. I believe that it is the American technology that will ultimately save Detroit. Now,
and you are watching Election 2008. Our show is being broadcast from CSU Dominguez Hills. We are live on the air until 3:30 today. We are talking about the environment, and I have with me, I am so happy to have with me Dr. Matthew Kahn, an economist from UCLA who focuses his research on the environment and urban growth. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. When we watch that clip from the governor, he's talking about the environment and environmental issues being one of passion. I certainly agree with that. But at what expense, we've been talking about. And he talks a lot about the environmental movement is at a tipping point. And when is it going to tip over to the point where we're willing to spend money to make changes in the environment? Do you have a prediction on when that's going to be? Are we there? Are we tipping over?
There's interesting questions of the we. So as the U.S. changes, as the population more educated, older, more immigrants, what would interest me as a social scientist nerd is, for each of these groups, have they tipped? Or are there specific groups in society who need to be convinced? One follow-up to what the governor was saying is, I believe, and one of the reasons I wanted to live in Los Angeles was that California is a hotbed of innovation. That it's no accident that Google is here. And so he said something fascinating of how government can be a catalyst by setting up the rules of the game and giving businessmen and women the opinion or the belief that tighter regulation will be enacted gives them incentives to invest in green research and development, which gets us the new next generation of hybrids, which helps to green the economy. And so he's a good economist. And so he should give up acting, give up politics, and come teach at UCLA.
I don't know if that's an invitation. He might be there. You never know.
He could teach my class.
I'm sure. And you'd probably have more students in the class than ever before.
My teaching ratings would go up.
Let me remind you that we certainly welcome your questions, your thoughts. How important is the environment as a political issue? Would you be willing to spend more money to have environmentally safe products, cars, equipment? We certainly welcome your thoughts. You may call us at 800-339-1193 or email us at dominguezonline.csudh.edu. We'd love to hear what you think. If you're willing to pay more money to help the environment, and that's a tough one. I don't know, is there a certain demographic that feels more strongly about spending more money to help the environment?
In my own research, I have found that richer people and more educated people are willing to pay this price premium. There's a debate about why. Are such groups more patient, trying to leave a bigger legacy for the next generation? A different idea that I wanted to mention for why some groups might not be willing to pay the price premiums demanded is the typical American a technological optimist who, a fancy word for thinks that if we get into a trouble like climate change threatening New Orleans, our smart engineers will come up with a fix. If the polar bears run out of ice up on one of these poles, we'll come up with some fake ice for them to stand on. If there's the belief in these sort of magic bullets, then it reduces the demand today to tighten your belt and to be willing to do what has to be done to address the issue. So in the case of climate change, of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So some economists are arguing that there can be perverse consequences if we're too optimistic about sort of magic bullets invented by our brilliant scientists.
Oh, that's an interesting point. I hadn't even thought about that. Let me switch gears here just slightly. I mean, I think it still addresses the same point, but the states have enacted their own set of standards when it comes to environmental issues. How did that come about, and how does California rate compared to other states? I mean, you said you came here because it was a hotbed and very progressive environmentally. But how do we stand compared to the other states on the laws that have been enacted in California, and how did that come about?
So you've stumped me on the second question, but I am convinced that California is the leading state in terms of both enacting legislation and success. The Air Resources Board deserves terrific credit for fighting smog and making Los Angeles a better place to live. And Mary Nichols and Governor Schwarzenegger are a great team for what they're building on AB 32. Many researchers are waiting for the specifics of how we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by that amount. But to answer your question, only the Northeast with this RGGI program, which is this greenhouse gas trading among electric utilities in New England. That's the only programs that get close to California. Texas is not as progressive a state. The interesting question to economists is there's this fancy word of leakage. If California engages in tight regulation, do footloose polluters just move to Texas? And so many economists support federal legislation because you can't escape. And while California is a big economy, people and firms can migrate. And so there's this fancy literature called the pollution havens literature that footloose, dirty firms who can run will tend to run away from states that regulate them to less regulated areas. And if that's true, California would have fewer manufacturing jobs. It would be punished for being environmentally progressive, and that would be a shame.
And is that actually happening, that companies are leaving California because the environmental standards are set too high, or is it costing them money? Are they actually leaving California?
There has been work on the unintended consequences of the Clean Air Act. There's some evidence supporting that claim, but California has other advantages that might counteract that. So for once, I want to hold my tongue. But that's from a governor's political calculus, that's a crucial parameter for deciding whether to go at it individually. And so I agree with you. And it would interest me how the governor's staff goes about estimating that.
And I think most of us will agree that you cannot separate the issues of the environment and the economy. They really go hand in hand, don't they?
They do. The governor said something smart. There's uncertainty about the environment. If we have tight AB 32 regulation, that's going to create new jobs. But if you said to me, Matt, what's going to be the names of these companies? It's not going to